the Episcopal Divinity School here in Cambridge. I am honored to introduce to you tonight Cardinal Koenig of Vienna, whose leadership and work seems best characterized as bridge building and dialogue, gifts we need so badly in today's war-torn world again. His theological studies, as well as his studies in philosophy and social, political, and the natural sciences, have prepared him for this life work of mediation and reconciliation. Cardinal Koenig's command of more than a dozen languages, especially of Russian, allows him to be a direct participant in such dialogic explorations and diplomatic negotiations. His leadership has not only opened doors and windows in my own church, it also has been of great significance for the dialogue with the Orthodox and pre-Chalcedonian churches, the churches in Western and Eastern Europe, the dialogue between Christians and members of other world religions, between believers and atheists, and last but not least, between faith and science. Cardinal Koenig was professor of theology from 1945 to 1952, and during this time he published his 5-volume work, And Christ and the Religions of the World. Other subsequent publications include a Dictionary of Comparative Religion, which appeared in 1956. He was appointed Archbishop of Vienna in 1956 and named cardinal by Pope John XXIII in 1958. His Eminence became one of the most prominent members of the Second Vatican Council and was very influential in shaping its vision. I've always admired that he invited Father Karl Rahner as his theological consultant or peritus, although some Vatican circles at the time suspected Rahner's innovative theology. He did so because, as he himself recognized, Rahner's intellectual courage to break through the traditional frameworks of theology in order to arrive at new insights and depths had some kinship with himself. From 1965 to 1980, the Cardinal continued the work of the Council as president of the Secretariat of Non-Believers, after it was agreed that he did not have to move to the Vatican but could remain in Vienna. His bridge-building work between Eastern and Western Europe is rooted in a deeply grounded experience. Traveling to the funeral of Cardinal Stepinac in 1960, he was injured in an automobile accident. In the hospital, he says, I became aware in a totally new way that the history and geography of Eastern Europe and that of Western Europe were deeply related. The so-called Iron Curtain, which at the time was still very real, was a military and political frontier. But my relationship with the Croatian people helped me discover that this demarcation line found no justification in the religious, spiritual, and human fields. In that Croatian hospital, I meditated on and thoroughly thought out my decision to do something concrete, to build bridges to the churches in East and West. We are grateful that Moral Rearmament has sponsored his visit to the States and, after 20 years, to Boston again. The Institute of Politics has invited him to speak to us tonight. His topic is the role of religion in East-West relations. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with me His Eminence Franz Kardinal Koenig of Vienna.
Ladies and gentlemen, coming from Europe, I appreciate very much this opportunity to address such an audience as this. We in Europe are well aware of the very high standards of excellence you attain in the seats of learning in this your city. So I take up my address, Religious Freedom and Human Rights within the tensions of East and West. Since 1945, the Church has been involved in the contest between East and West. The establishment of an atheist dictatorship in one of the largest countries on earth, starting with the October Revolution of 1917, was felt as a deep shock by the Church. The struggle against militant communism, especially in Poland, was therefore ab initio supported by the Church. Attempts to introduce Jesuit missionaries into Russia in the 1920s and to set up a clandestinely consecrated hierarchy in most cases meant death, incarceration, or banishment to those concerned. Humanitarian measures taken by the Church to ameliorate suffering caused by the shortage of food in Russia after World War I remained virtually unrecognized by the new Kremlin bosses. To be sure, there have been discreet attempts on the part of the Vatican as well as of the Kremlin to establish contacts despite all differences. For example, as early as February the 1st, 1919, Cardinal Gaspari, then Secretary of State, undertook to intervene for an imprisoned bishop on behalf of Benedict XV by sending a telegram to Lenin. A few days later, the Vatican received a politely worded telegraphic reply. In the course of the Rapallo Conference, 1923, Monsignor Pizzardo, then acting on orders of Pius XII, had talks with the Soviet Commissioner for External Affairs, Chicherin. In consideration of public opinion, the Soviet leadership, as at that time too, wanted to avoid complete severance of ties to the Vatican. Among other things, the Kremlin leadership let alone that it might be interested in the establishment of a Vatican diplomatic mission in Moscow. After 1927, however, these contacts came to an end. Stalin had taken over after the death of Lenin. Measures against the Church and religion in general became ever more militant. A small episode which allegedly occurred toward the end of Lenin's life might be of interest. A Catholic journalist named Bede, I didn't know him, met Lenin. He was in exile and went to see him times in January 1923 when he was in power. At that time, Bede had already become. Later, he published what he remembered these things, relating the following. Humanity will follow the Soviets, said Lenin. From now there will exist a government. But he added, I believe, however, that under the wreckage of institutions, they can still be living on. In the next century, there will be only one government, namely the Soviet system and one religion. Too bad, we shall not live to see it. Was very sincere, I don't know. The era of Pope Pius XII, when he acted as Secretary of State, characterized by a complete breach with and criticism of any dialogue countries. On their side, the necessary prerequisites for dialogue were less. To be sure, he argued against atheist communism in the Vatican, but neither was it required. The second point came with John III. Not that he invalidated what had been said, not even being doctrinaire. He was endowed with a special charisma and believed the style effects of personal contact with communists. In his encyclical, he called upon us to cooperate with all men in the interest of common aim, such as peace, adhering to other ideas, with those whose ideologies, doctrines the Church condemned. It was God who prompted me to relations between the Church and East, though I was convinced that my role could be a modest one. At one of my audiences, that he asked me to start an committee in his exile embassy in Budapest. That this could not. He asked in his direct way, what good about it? Walk to in Vienna, and to Budapest. Well, I went back after many troubles. Instead of turned out it's to be the first of many trips, not only to Budapest, but to other countries as well. Hospital of a car actually ample opportunity to ponder this, which historiography suggests to a presentation of Vienna. I'm aware of it. In the years, trips to Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Yugoslavia, and so on, and establish relevant not on order of the Vatican, my capacity as Archbishop of Vienna, of the Vatican. That since I am an official Vatican representative, but as Archbishop, I could declare me of a private character. In those days, it was with each trip to an Eastern country was on only of communist. Such a trip would be for the politics of those countries as a betrayal, as nothing could on each trip joy of the people. The Catholics took my visit as a that he had not been forgotten, that we had done as a result of my visit obliged to correct many as in the West. Was at the beginning of my trips. These questions are to the Vatican Ostpolitik. Claim not that the Vatican was initiated on 1960. On this day, John received Khrushchev's husband, Archibald. The Pope issued his encyclical Paris. To the custom, this was directed not but to all. In this encyclical concerning the peacefulness of goodwill, Paul continued his opening towards. In 1994, he published his Ecclesiam Suam, its down principles for dialogue with Christians, non-Christians, and with the through whose duty it is to promote to remove trust. Correspond with in 1906, Paul VI, the Minister Podskorny, then former head of state of East Russia. Audience had been visits from foreign ministers. John Paul II, native of Poland, continued the dialogue intensively. As head of the cabinet, he has visited one communist land, namely Poland. Realizes the importance of 75 and big steps toward peace. For the United Nations and for the world peace and for and religion. He promotes personal convictions, and several times he undertakes journeys to various countries and continents, international cooperation, understanding among religious freedom and appeals to the public. Out spectrum of fundamental freedom, I choose only, but is an essential element. This is trust, religious freedom, and this, as I want to claim, far for the tension in East. I think that use this tension is at the same time to peace and the reduction of trust. Therefore, I will in short lecture. First, what do you understand by freedom and cities? Secondly, this contrast way upon the between East and West. Themes of Helsinki and the following done to the bond between religious freedom and atheism to contribute to reduction of tension between East and West, the same by religious. Try to explain this. In the non-communist union of the West, freedom of means that the individual is free from its concerning. Nobody can force against his conscience, as well not be prevented from what his conscience tells him. This is not only private, but of domain. Concerning Eastern states, some acts of the law, which also to speak of the Western conception of the are, for instance, of similar constitution Eastern states. Article 50 of the Constitution of 77, I quote, "The citizens of the USSR of conscience is the rightness to admission, to exercise or to make a propaganda in the USSR that is separate and Asian such." That's Article 2. The laws in the others, sometimes the from the point of there cannot say against the wording of law, but practice show they are to understand. The program of the Marxists is decisive. According to Marxism, religion but has not happened during the last 60 years. Many think it is contrary. And any religious life by means and of every religion. Therefore, for example, it is that an active member of the religious community applies as a official or a Leninist doctrine is harmful to the state and citizen, and therefore, because of the law but of and acto, though it is bear witness to any kind of religion, second-class citizen. This fact, done more precisely, I will take the generally of the German Democratic, the last edition I had in hand. The official attitude leadership is the I quote, the official for the youth, I quote, formation of conscience will finally appear in the fully developed community of the house and disappear. Atheism, in contrast to religion of the Western world, not as an element, state atheism is something new in history. At the time of Constantine, in Islamics, or at the time of national Jews and Christians, brutally persecuted in the or for state atheism, however, and to remove and die. What is meant by religious freedom and gender may be discussed in detail by the help of two long essays by the Russian scholar. In the October 80, we can read about the atheism. The official Russian page article filed in Vienna is on the way a part of the Soviet population, Italy still religious. The paper draws the conclusion this phenomenal indifference on the part of trade unions. In other words, schools devoted enough to this religion in their education work. The church is taking advantage to young people into it. The article also points of intensifying the big materialism. Another word mentioned in this, that is said to be as a weapon communism. Why does freedom and state atheism weigh on the relationship between Miller's and colleague of Tito expelled from the party and for a long time in Bavaria? It's very just any longer, but Miller and Gillas, indicated some months ago the split of today shown best by the contrast between religion. The confrontation between religion and state touches the resistance to sharp and irreconcilable of any kind. Any link between these doesn't come from religion, but from the that means for religion is treated in Iran almost as sub like in the US. to decrease the tension is the Helsinki, the process of Helsinki. I was delighted to find by Sharansky that he is of the 10 years ago they were signed by all and the continental countries. Contain number 7 of the core basket express declaration to resume fundamental and principle number 7. I quote, participating states rights and fundamentals, including the freedom of options related for all without distinction to race, sex, language. This framework states will recognize the freedom to profess alone or in communities, religion or belief with the dictates of this and in the acts of Helsinki. In fact, do not refer but to as the distinction shows. Statement in the fact no basic religion and human rights has achieved far. A sign of hope at the last year's experts in Canada. Meeting with representative and signatory powers secondly dedicated to the respect to human mental freedom. Now, let us question, what can we do to decrease the contrast between religious freedom and atheism from the Western point of view? Looking at the Germans, bear in mind aware of the fact that all Easts are in the same boat. There will always be contrasts, but life must be seen as just. We must reduce trust and of mutual confidence to this some comments. I would like to present 4 remarks now. It would be naive to count a conversion of the countries. There is and Java. We make together a way of sides possible. Dialogues. That means continual negotiations between equal partners. Remark. No attempt of such a dialogue in Hungary a few weeks ago. In an essay in the Communist journal Világosság, the conference of the bishop of the possibility, necessity of a dialogue with new argument side. The bishop writes not only to Marxist statements of Christianity, a great number of them, but one can also recognize that the importance of religion is no longer only either neutral or even positive. As an example, he quotes from an essay of a well-known communist jail concerning the human which serves as well. It is to accord and to form with him than who knows right for anything and every moral measure. The religious man, as the secretary of the bishops, writes, let him by moral such as patience, efforts for a good family life, both pleasure in the child, the education, and further esteem of the usual of egoism. A religious philosophy guides all human beings who live in a society to create and a social. That's what happens in Hungary. The representatives of moral rearmament working successfully all over the world today to find solutions to conflicts of this kind through common dialogue. During the delegates, the 40th National Moral Rearmament Conference we held at Co, as well as at centers in India, and will take place. This is a sign that it is possible. All of state from the UN Geneva in autumn last year is at least the importance of it, and of that a means to overcome contrasts. Remark 4. It is a meaningful message which came from Moscow just a week before this year. The always well-informed Preston College in London reports of in the Journal of the Monkey, because of the legal returning rights and of religious communities. It has become possible for religious community, above all affects the Orthodox Church in Russia, it's possible to acquire property. Up to now, church buildings have been owned by the state. The law that bans young people under 18 years from being a member of the parish seems to vanish. Religious acts allowed without bounds of the local authorities. In hospitals, old people's homes, and prisons from now on. Religious acts must no longer take place in separate rooms as up to now. Informations of this kind seem to indicate a progress in the sense of the final acts of Helsinki. Seems to indicate a progress. They remarkably help to reduce the tension east and west concerning human rights. But you can also read between the lines which factions have existed up to now. We can take another helpful indication out of the new system in China, where the conflicts between state atheism and religious freedom have been reduced considerably. In fact, you can notice a certain tolerance there. Sometimes you can hear in China that Marx lived in the 19th century and that his problem has been literally adopted for the 20th century. The relationship between religion and science has changed considerably since then as well. In conclusion, I want to stress once more the final act of Helsinki as an extremely important basis for reducing the contrast between religious freedom and state atheism within the whole complex of tension between East and West by negotiations and talks in the future, and thus reduce mistrust, strengthen mutual confidence, and serve peace. So I want to share a hope with you that we can have a different world, divided no longer by the politics of East and West, and I have the profound conviction that those of all ages here tonight, and especially the young people, can bring this about. Thank you.
The Colonel is prepared to entertain questions. However, I would like to ask you to come to the microphone. There are 2 microphones here and I think 2 upstairs. So would you please, when you have questions to ask, come to the microphone.
Cardinal Koenig, as you said in your speech, you were very active in establishing contacts with Eastern Bloc governments. Would you care to assess what the results have been in Czechoslovakia and Hungary, and maybe offer a possible prognosis of how further developments will proceed?
Czechoslovakia and Hungary. The situation, I start with Hungary. The situation in Hungary seems to be, to me, very interesting. There are considerable changes to be seen, and the contacts between the Catholic bishops, and I know the same happens with the other communities, with the man who is responsible for church affairs in the government, are more or less regular. There is a monthly meeting, and, well, of course, you have to be always cautious, because there are opposing interests. The leadership in Hungary and in every Eastern Bloc state wants to make propaganda, wants to make even use of church communities to help them or to introduce troubles into the communities. But my impression is that the gentleman whom I know, the gentleman who is responsible for church affairs in the government in Hungary, might try to find a way out. That takes time, that needs patience, that needs understanding, and depends, of course, a lot from the bloc in itself, because Hungary couldn't act independently. As far as Czechoslovakia is concerned, the situation is very difficult for many reasons. The last reason was a pilgrimage to Velehrad between the Czechs and the Slovaks. And that happened last summer, when the government in Czechoslovakia tried to, there are preparations going on for the millennium of Christianity in all the eastern states. And Czechoslovakia wanted to take it into its own hands and prepared as a national event. Slavic culture began in those years, and they didn't mention religion or Christianity, but a new feeling of Slavonic peoples started in those years, and therefore the went in this direction. Well, so a big feast was prepared in Velehrad. That's a shrine for Czechoslovakia, a famous shrine, and the government probably and the police didn't expect it, that so many people would come. I know that thousands of young people marched 2, 3, 4 days and nights to reach Velehrad. So it was overwhelmed. And I may say this a little bit, well, it's well known all over the world. When the official talks began, shouts were heard. Well, disappear, let other people speak, we want the cardinal, we want the pontiff, and so on. For the situation in Czechoslovakia, it was incredible that something like that happened. But it was a sign of the force in living, existing in the people, the faith in that state. And I myself tried to join Velehrad, and having a diplomatic passport, I could cross the frontier without any visa. But from my experience, it is better to ask the ambassador in Vienna, would you let me through could I cross the border? And he said, of course, you are invited. Very polite answer. Then later, an hour or 2 hours later, a second telephone call. Well, we are awfully sorry, it's not possible now, later on. And so I tried again in May or June to reach the Cardinal in Prague. I hope it will be possible, but I don't know. Pray for me that it will be possible.
Another question? If there's not another question, I may ask a question. What do you suggest that American churches, Christian churches, and other religions could do to lessen the tensions between East and West?
First, go and visit those countries. I should like to encourage all the tourists, because your money is important in Eastern countries. And therefore, tourism is now allowed and welcome. And so I would like to encourage you very, very much. First, go there as far as you can. Send especially your young people there. And then dialogue is very important. Then another aspect, write letters wherever you can, and if you get addresses from the other side. And especially try to get exact information. It is a terrible shock for the people on the other side if they hear in their own propaganda papers, look here, in the United States you read this. Now come and see. The report is wrong. Maybe only half of the report was wrong. So it is so important to get to know all what's going on. Try to get all the facts, but you must insist that your journalists verify really what's going on, how it is. All the names must be correct, and all the dates must be exact. Then it makes a great impression in the Western world, in the Eastern world, when such things become known on the other side, in the Western world. So we have an official diplomacy. I know that the Helsinki Acts we consider as a basis to insist, because both sides signed it. We must discuss problems. We must try to go ahead with all what has been signed in the document of Helsinki. And as I have heard from Ottawa, it was for the first time the beginning of a sort of a dialogue between East and West concerning human rights, and because human rights include religious freedoms too. But would you allow me to go back to the first questions? You asked me what I would do with the official members of the government. I can't do very much. I meet them from time to time at a reception, and they are interested to meet foreigners, but I have it's not my task, and it shouldn't be my task, to try official, an official dialogue. That is the task of the Vatican, of the Cardinal Casaroli.
I have a question. Cardinal Koenig, if I may digress, what has been the reaction in Austria to the accusations against Kurt Waldheim, and do you feel also that this has harmed his chances to be elected?
Would you be so kind to understand that being a foreigner here and without the last information, I can't comment on that problem.
I was interested about the development of the sacramental practice in the church in Eastern Europe, for example. I mean, I've just come from my parish confirmation. It was a whole cultural reality, the streets filled with people coming. Is it still a massive reality, baptism of children and first Holy Communions and confirmations and church marriage, funerals in the church?
I would say the number has been reduced a little bit. It varies from region to region. but the church attendance is growing, as far as I saw it 2 years ago in Czechoslovakia, and the sacraments, no problem to receive sacraments, but the problem is, for instance, a teacher who wants to go to church service on Sunday, he has to go to some place where he is or she is unknown, so that in the school it would be not known that she or he went to a mass. But on the other hand, in some nations it is more difficult to receive baptism, to get confirmed, or to receive the rest of the sacraments. In the Catholic countries, it's more or less possible. But, of course, everybody knows about the risks. If he has a certain position, then he will probably go at midnight to the parish priest and tell him, well, I would like to baptize my child, that you baptize my child, or that I receive Holy Communion or go to confession. But church attendance, what I hear or can see in Russia, is growing. There is, without any doubt, a religious revival among the young people.
Sir?
Your Eminence, could you please give us a few words, tell us a little bit about the situation of the Roman Catholic Church in Lithuania? And I would also like to ask you, does your cautious optimism about the future extend to those Roman Catholic priests who are now being held in the Perm prison camps in the Soviet Union?
Yes, that is a very big problem, because the Ukrainian Catholics are considered as officially they don't exist, as we know and you know, and as a matter of fact they exist in a huge number. And on the other hand, the pontiff, the Roman pontiff, who is asked to establish officially the Ukrainian church, is waiting, because he feels, as far as I know, that he would do more harm now establishing officially the Ukrainian church than to wait. And therefore, I know it is a terrible, difficult question and situation, and they suffer very, very much. And you have marvelous examples. That's something, besides that, should be brought to the notice of the Western world, how those people live, what they do to remain linked up with their own church community, and they are afraid that they are forgotten. So we must speak very often without making a big row. Speak very often about their conditions, about their situations, about their problems. The more the Western world is informed about the real situation, the better it is, the easier it will be for the pontiff in the future to regulate that difficult question.
Sir?
Your Eminence, this follows somewhat from the last question, but I recall that during your talk you did mention Keston College, and I was wondering if you believe that groups such as those of Michael Bourdeau and others who try to promote the rights of various religious minorities in Eastern Bloc countries, whether it's through demonstration or various informational type programs, is that useful? Or various demonstrations from the benefit for Soviet Jews or Lithuanian Catholics or Eastern Rite Catholics in Ukraine, whatever, are those counterproductive? Do they make the Eastern Bloc governments more kind of retrograde to developments?
Yes, that's always a very delicate question. if a tourist outside his own country speaks to a journalist and the journalist writes something, then it's always a great danger that in his own country people have to suffer. I take the example of the Keston College. I know Father Boudreau very, very well, and I appreciate the activity very, very much, because Keston College tries to quote the facts without attacking or making an anti-propaganda, but they try to inform the non-communist world about all what's going on. And that, of course, it's always a certain risk included in it. But nevertheless, it is far more important to run such a risk and to try to present as it is the facts, the names, the events as it happened. And they try to usually get very good, they are very good informed, they get the best informations, and I would recommend the Keston College, as far as I know it, to everybody of you, in case you want exact information. They have excellent files, and they have published books and reviews. That's my personal answer to your question. But I understand the risk you alluded at.
Since it's late in the evening, I will take one more question, if that is fine with you.
Oh,
Yes, sir?
I had actually two. Is that, sorry.
Okay, one more person.
One thing is, could the recent easing of religious persecution in the Soviet Union that you spoke of be just a way of drawing out traitors to the state? I mean, could they just be getting them to come out of the woodwork by just making it seem like it's freer?
Excuse me, I didn't quite get your question. Where are you?
Oh, I'm over here. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Could the recent easing of religious persecution in the Soviet Union that you spoke of be simply a way of drawing out traitors to the state, because they view people who are into religion as being traitors?
I don't quite understand. Well, of course, in all those countries, you have distinguished. Some gave up their religion because they want to get a nice position in the official government or administration. Some are hesitating between, and as it happens everywhere and all the times. And another group becomes far more religious. And my impression is that it is a process of purification, for instance, for the Orthodox Church and for all the other communities. Many come back to their own church after years. And I used to say, the best Christians you find in the Eastern world. And
Could I just ask one more thing? Since the Soviets have not lived up at all to the human rights agreements of the Helsinki Accord that you were talking about, it would seem that we don't have any reason to trust them. And I'm wondering what their reasons are for not trusting us.
Well, it is their ideology. And the fundamental difference between East and West is the idea what is man and what is the world. For Marx himself, man is an ensemble of social elements That's all. Here is a bundle of social elements, and what we declare as rights I get by nature and not from my government, they don't accept it because the social or the social things only count, and everybody has to be seen in relation to social events, social activity. The personal value doesn't exist, or as I have heard from Ottawa, they say the fundamental rights of a person